Maxime, so this is the title, Boosting Learning Impact with AI-Powered Personalization. Mostly Maxime going to be talking, I'm going to be hosting, watching the chat. But Maxime, we have a question, don't we, for everybody?
Yes. Yes, exactly. So we thought we'd start with the question to get the chat going. So you just write in the chat and Donald and I will just look into it. So how are you currently using personalization to boost learning process in your organization? Yeah. So it will be interesting to have your perspective on this right now.
Now we're going to do the hardest bit, Maxime, which is to stop talking. I've been talking for the first 8 minutes. And I just want everyone to have a moment here to think about it. And the answer to this could be, well, we're not doing anything, and that is fine. But if you could just share how you are currently personalizing learning in your own organization. And Gail, very honestly, is saying, look, poorly and badly. And actually, you know, we want that. We know it's important. We know there's, well, Maxime will look at the 2 sigma problem later on. We know that personalization is effective, but it's difficult. Landon says, leveraging personalization by personal goals, job responsibility, personality types. Landon would love to know more about that. Andrea is saying learning paths recommendations, and just got a thumbs up from that. And actually learning paths is one of those things which is a good first step. Manually talking to individuals, David Snow says, and there is no better, more personal way of doing it. Is it scalable though? Very little, says Daniel, a bit like Gail. A cursus dedicated to the position and job of the people, says Francois. And this idea that personalization can be associated with a role, very common, good first step. Tom's saying primarily focused on delivering feedback that's individualized. So if I look at these, Maxime, as they come in, I see some themes developing. Some people are saying, look, we're just not doing it well enough. Other people are doing it like Dave Snow at an individual basis, talking to people. Other people are doing it on a job basis. So they're saying, well, if you're in this particular type of job, then yes, you should do these things rather than those things. Trying to use LinkedIn, says Thomas, as a means to democratize learning and using curation and recommendations. There's a number of things underneath this, and Yao points out personal recommendation, not automatic. So there's a number of things here which are pointing towards personalization, but they require human input and they are not automatically scalable. And David says personalized to groups, which isn't really personalization, is it? No, it's not. So have you got any thoughts about that, Maxime? Because this is, I think everyone's being really honest, and thank you for sharing it. It is a really good reflection of how people are doing personalization at the moment. Is that your understanding, Maxime? Is what you've seen?
You summarize it perfectly. I think there's a lot of people saying that it's a rather laborious manual process. But of course, this is kind of the best way because you actually talk one-on-one to people. It's just you cannot really scale that to a large number of employees in a big company. And also some people are talking about recommendations, which is a typical use of AI in a sense to say, for example, like on Amazon, people who bought that also bought those other things. So this is a form of personalization, you could say. I cannot debate whether it is really personalization because it's tending to make everybody the same on the average. So it's not really helping people develop. But I think, yeah, that sounds like a very good panorama of different attempts at personalization.
It really is. David is saying he considers that his contribution has ended now that you managed to get us to laugh. Also, David, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, Clivez is saying they're looking at a sort of 2080 model. Okay, they can't do everything, but just with a few adaptations of times, assessments, and so on, we get great motivation. And this is interesting, not just on results, but on motivation. We know motivation is crucial for effective learning. So they're doing a great job by concentrating on the things they can alter, and it's having an impact. We don't have the resource to go beyond that 20%. Does that mean, I think he says, does that mean we should do it? I think he probably means, does that mean we shouldn't do it? So I think, you know, we can do something. And I always say, just because you can't do everything doesn't mean you shouldn't do something. And I think that's a great example of what you've done. You're doing something and it's very effective, David. Thank you for sharing that. Maxime, let's go back to you and what you're doing. Take us through your understanding from 2019 of working. You're a startup, aren't you, at MAGMA? But take us through what you're doing and the impact now you're having on learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting now to first explain what the problem is a bit more sharply, and then what could be a solution in principle. And then we'll explain how the solution that we'll highlight can be implemented. I'll show a quick live demo of one tool that can be helpful in this case, and then we will just have some more Q&As. But again, feel free during the presentation to write questions and comments in the chat, and Donald will then get back to me with this. Great. So what is the problem to begin with? So I think it's kind of an obvious fact that every employee is really quite unique. So they have unique background knowledge, they have unique experience, they have different learning abilities, they might have different needs, motivations, and so on. And so it makes for a very diverse population of employees with very different trajectories, going somewhere different and starting from somewhere different, and with a different speed, you could say. So this means that it's a very complex situation. Nevertheless, in most corporate learning programs, the approach would be one size fits all. So you have a number of employees, they will all be kind of funneled into some training program, which is the same for everybody, and maybe it will last like 2 months or 2 days or 2 hours. It doesn't matter. But at the end, the original hope of the management of the company was, and even the employees themselves, was to undergo some transformation. So, for example, the caterpillar here got transformed into a butterfly, but all the other ones were not transformed really. So this is because it did not really fit with the unique characteristics of each of the employees. And therefore, the effectiveness is very disappointing. So it's very frustrating, ineffective for everybody. So what is the result is that if we look at the learning performance on this graph, so from 0% to 100%, we see that in this case of one-size-fits-all learning, the result is that most employees will have some mediocre performance. Oops, just muting. Okay, so it means that most people will kind of learn a little bit, and they will be able to transform this learning performance into business performance and productivity, but it's quite average and mediocre, and there's only a few, very few individuals maybe who are particularly motivated that are actually fully benefiting from the training program as it was intended at its conception. So this problem has been identified for a long time in the learning sciences, and in the 80s, the American psychologist Bloom asked the question, what would it take to bring us from this kind of mediocre form of learning to something that looks like this orange graph here, which means that almost all the population, so all the employees that took part in the training are actually fully benefiting from it. And they had a very high learning performance and then transferred that to a very high increase in their business performance. So this should be in principle possible. Otherwise, why would we even bother with training and learning if we cannot achieve a very effective result? And what we see is that, yeah, they all excel. And this was coined the 2 sigma problem by Bloom. Because in statistics, when you have 2 groups and one of them on average is better than 98% than the other group, it means that it's a 2 sigma effect, and then it's really very, very radical in terms of improvement.
It's 2 standard deviations, isn't it, to one side? I think that's,
yeah, exactly.
That's how
the sigma is the mathematical symbol for deviation.
And Bloom's point was that if you're doing one-to-one tutoring versus one size fits all, and that was the key thing. Personalization, and you know, this wasn't theoretical. This was actually trialed, and this is what you get. What I find interesting, Maxime, is that it's the 2 sigma problem, not the 2 sigma effect.
Yes.
What he's focused on here is that we've got a problem here. We know that we can get people learning much more effectively. The problem is, it's not scalable. That's the issue, because you can't scale one-to-one tuition.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, he found a solution, and it is personalization, but it's just a problem. Yeah, how do you actually do it? So there's no, he explored actually a lot of different factors and interventions and transformation of the learning process. And he found that personalization by far was the most effective and the most impactful to get to this excellence from all of the learners. So what is the solution now to this problem? So indeed it is personalization. So let's try to understand what this means. So on one side, usually if you think of a training program, maybe in your company, let's say you want to train your employees about leadership. So what you will do is write down maybe 200 slides of PowerPoint about leadership, full of recommendations and ideas and concepts. So this is the content on one side. And then you would kind of catapult this to the employees. And the idea is that they just receive that. Maybe it's like a 2-day workshop, or it could be something that's spread out over months or years even. But in the end, you just send them this content and you expect that they will directly absorb it and put it into practice. And this is what leads to the mediocre results that we've seen in the previous slides. And instead, what personalization means is that we will actually adapt the learning process to every employee. And in the notion of adapting, it means that it needs to be kind of a two-way process. So you need to have this arrow that goes in the other direction from the learner or the employee towards the training material. And this feedback will be used to really adapt to the learning performance in real time, you could say, of each of the employees. And this really will generate some virtuous circles. So the more they learn, the more you can personalize, because what's happening in their mind is better known, and the more you can give them useful things to learn and so on. So this is this kind of virtuous circle that personalization triggers if it's applied. But indeed, how to achieve that? It's very hard to scale. So you've already spent like days and weeks and months maybe writing down the training materials. And this was already a lot of work. And so you don't want to have to multiply this by, let's say, 100 participants to your leadership program and to write, specific things for each of them. And then also be very attentive to the reaction of each of them to each slide to point them towards the right direction. I mean, this is like a logistical nightmare. You would have to really follow up a lot of data, both on the side of the content and on the side of the employees learning this content. So this is very hard to do, and as it was mentioned in the opening question, if you do this manually, it's very hard to scale. But this is exactly where artificial intelligence will come to the rescue, and so this is a solution that the power of AI offers us. And the idea is that what will happen is that the content itself will become alive, you could say. It will become interactive, and it will give to each employee just the right content at the right moment, and it will pay attention to the reaction of the employee. So it's really opening its eyes, and it's becoming kind of interactive, and this kind of two-way learning really happens in a very powerful way thanks to artificial intelligence. So what's happening in the mind or in the brain of each of the employees become clearer and clearer to the AI, and it allows to give the best content possible. So you might think, so this is kind of a very heavy intervention to your training programs, and everything has to be started from scratch, and it has to be a completely different logistics and so on. And in fact, it's not necessarily the case. The way that this can be implemented is just as a complement to your pre-existing training program. So the kind of funnel training program that existed before will stay the same. It's not really disrupted or anything, but it's just complemented by some personal AI for each of the participants that will understand what they're going through, so where they're coming from in terms of background knowledge, where they're going in terms of motivations and goals, and it will understand also how their brain works, and it will facilitate the consolidation of everything that is presented during this training program. And of course, in the end, the result is much stronger, so the transformations and the new behaviors that were expected to take place after the training are actually observed. So let's take maybe an example to see specifically what AI could do in terms of improving the learning process. So this is an example from the learning sciences. It's a famous example from the late 19th century by German psychologist Ebbinghaus. And I'm sure many of you have seen this infamous forgetting curve. What this represents here is that at the moment where a new concept is introduced to you, your knowledge will just shoot up to 100%, and it gives you the impression that you've mastered it and that you're good. But in fact, what will happen subconsciously is that you will very quickly forget this concept exponentially fast. And when maybe 1 week later it's time to apply this new concept or new behavior, it actually fails because it's completely gone from your memory. So this biological process is the reason why a lot of time and money is wasted in most of the training programs. And in fact, Ebbinghaus also suggested the solution to this problem, and the solution is to not let the concept be totally forgotten, but to reactivate it just at the right moment, where it's possible to actually think, oh, wait, what was that? Ah, okay, I remember. And each time that you recall the concept this way, it will send a signal to your brain that this is indeed an important piece of knowledge, and it has to be encoded into your long-term memory because you will have occasions to apply it later on. So the best way to fight this forgetting curve is to reactivate the concept just at the right moment. But of course, it's also here very difficult to do well without AI, because you need to find what is the right moment for different people that might have different strength of memory, or for hundreds of different concepts and ideas and behaviors and recommendations. And so it becomes, again, a logistical nightmare to keep track of all of those aspects. But with AI, it's very powerful, and it can really understand the way that people learn and the way that their memory will consolidate the concepts. And therefore, it's able to show the right content at the right moment to every employee, and to really personalize those reactivations to achieve the long-term retention. So you can see, for example, here, the learning was quite fast. So with just 2 reactivation, you can see it's basically a flat curve into the long-term memory. And with this employee here, it needed more reactivations. So this is something that AI can detect automatically and be very powerful.
And Maxime, what you're talking about here, by the way, of course, is this idea that you're reactivating it during the course of delivering information to people, during the course of people's learning. And we've got David kindly putting in the retrieval practice information into chat. Very often when we talk about Ebbinghaus, we're talking about what happens after you've learned something, but actually what you're saying is during the course of people learning something, that constant reactivation, and which will be different for different people at different rates and probably different concepts, but each of them could be reactivated to enable them to, as you say, move it into long-term memory, and it will be different, done differently for each person.
Yeah, that's a great point actually to highlight. So here we see, for example, the training could last, let's say, 2 months or something like this. And indeed, you can start those reactivations from the first day, because you've already seen a lot of new ideas and concepts, and then you can start reactivating this while you go through the rest of the training. And so what is important is to kind of do this in a significant period of time, so a few weeks or a few months, and then you can really have all the content that was shown during the training solidly in your memory. But if it's, let's say, a one-day training, then you go to the training and then you can reactivate for a few more weeks or months, depending on how intense the content was.
I always give my example of learning Turkish this way, by simply having a notebook and jotting down that I had to go back and revisit stuff on the 1 day, 1 page before, 3 pages before, 5, 7, up to 28 pages before. It was in the course of my continual learning program. We've got questions coming in. I'm not going to ask them all to you. I'll save some to the end, but there is one thing here from Gail, which got a thumbs up also from somebody else. how does AI detect the profile of the learners automatically? So how do you know when what needs to be reactivated and when it should be reactivated? Do you want to deal with that right now, or do you want to, will that be coming up later on?
I think it's a key question indeed, and this is what we've been thinking about since 2019. But maybe it will, some elements of it will come back later.
All right, I tell you what, Ben, if you deal with that during the course of the rest of the presentation, because we're about halfway through, and then if you haven't dealt with it to Gail's satisfaction, we're going to ask you to answer it at the end as well.
Yes, with pleasure. Sounds good. So yeah, now we're moving on to the how. So we've seen that the problem is kind of the low effectiveness of learning programs, and the solution is personalization with AI. But how does that exactly work? So again, we can imagine a case where we're trying to go from theory to practice. So on one side, we have training material. So this could be really anything like PowerPoint presentations. It could be e-learning modules. It could be videos or articles, books, any kind of documents that is considered worthy for the employees. And usually the process is to just expose the employees to this documentation and training material, and then to expect naively that they will change their behaviors. And usually it's not really that effective. So what can be done, and this is what my startup has been doing for some years, is to simply complement this process. So add a few steps, in a sense, that will make sure that we enable this virtuous circle of personalization that really shoots up the effectiveness of the learning. So we call this a personal AI mentor, and it's kind of an app that will accompany each of the participants of the training programs from the beginning of the program up to several months after the end of the program. And it leads to much better results and in terms of putting the new knowledge into action. So you might wonder, but how does this work for the first step? So I have some PowerPoint or some e-learning modules. How do I turn this into an AI mentor that has absorbed it and is able to communicate with each of the employees in a personal way? So this is also using very powerful AI models. So it's basically based on GPT-4. And the process is that you send us your documentation. So again, it could be PowerPoints, PDF, videos, e-learning modules, and so on. This is everything that you have already written down for your employees. And from that, we will generate automatically with our AI and in collaboration with GPT-4. We will generate a very, very large number of interactive questions that are implement micro-learning. So this means that it will kind of automatically transform your standard training materials into some interactive digital micro-learning questions. And this process can scale very well, and it creates a diversity of questions on the key points from your documents. So usually people struggle to understand this. I think people who have tried ChatGPT, played with it a little bit, they kind of understand that this sort of thing is possible now, but it feels a little bit like magic. It's true. So here to enlighten exactly what takes place, I've taken a slide from some food safety training program in this case. And I wanted to show that the AI is able to read kind of the content of the slide and figure out what are the main points and transform them into something that's interactive and that will stimulate the participants. So here we see, for example, there's a recommendation, chill groceries within 2 hours, something like this. So this is the gist of this sentence. We see that this has been transformed into a micro-learning question. So within how many hours should one chill groceries? And the correct answer has been mixed with so-called distractors, so incorrect answers that are nevertheless quite plausible. So this is also automatically generated by our AI that will really try to make the question as interesting and challenging as possible. Of course, this is a quite simple question, so this is why it's a novice level question, you could say. But the same process could also lead to some advanced level questions. So in that case, it will take the same paragraph but then it will understand that there is a special condition. So if it's exposed to a certain temperature, the number of hours that you can wait until you chill your groceries is different. And here the distractors are also a bit tighter, which makes the question more challenging. So you see, so from PowerPoint slide, just like you may have in your training programs, our AI understood all the nuances and the different depth of difficulty from the contents and was able to transform that automatically into interesting, stimulating questions.
Maxime, very quickly, what about the distractors?
Yes.
If you have distractors, how are they produced?
They're produced by the AI also. The AI is able to understand what constitutes a good distractor. So it has to be something plausible,
Yep.
but definitely wrong. And so this appears automatically also by the AI.
Okay.
Actually, there's a whole field of research in AI about this kind of attempt to try to cheat an AI that generates some content.
I am familiar with both that and also with producing these questions by hand, which is such a painful process. So I love just seeing this bit by itself, but carry on.
Yeah, it's like a mental torture to have to think of the wrong answer because it's like you don't.
It has to be just the right amount of wrong in the right way. It's terrible.
Right, exactly. And here from just one sentence, we've already generated 2 questions, and it could be many, many more questions, and they will have the diversity that is required to have a chance at implementing personalization. Of course, if you have like only 20 questions and that's it, you will have to show them to all the participants, and there's no chance of personalization. Whereas when you have thousands of questions, you can really personalize to what each of the employees is going through. So of course, personalization also means that you have a continuous understanding of the learning process of each of the employees. And therefore, you can also give them a continuous feedback, which is very interesting because it will give them motivation to move on. So it's a kind of gamification, if you want, so they can see their engagement, activity, the regularity. They can see their learning gains. They can see those forgetting curves that are evolving as they use the app. And they can also see the dynamic evolution of their progress in all the different sectors that they're being trained about. And also, it gives them a level of self-confidence when the AI is telling them, yes, you're definitely good at this, you definitely master that, and you have it in your long-term memory. It's very empowering to then put this into practice. And of course, for the managers, this visibility on the knowledge of all the employees and the participants is very useful because you can monitor what's going on in the dashboard, and you can see how many people are active, who is active, how many questions they answered, the learning time. You can see the progress of their mastery and so on. So this comes with a lot of very interesting data that allow you to justify the investment in the training program, for example. And here, this is one of those metrics, which we call the learning gain. And this was taken from a project that we had a few years ago with Swisscom. And this was a leadership training. And they provided our AI to one group and not to the other group. And then we measured the learning gain. And so after a few months, we could see like a huge difference. Without our AI, there was only 20% of learning gain. And with our AI, it jumped up to 80% learning gain. So this is really the type of 2 sigma effects that Bloom was talking about. And here we were able to measure it in this corporate training context.
Got Maxime, a whole bunch of questions coming in. So I just want to, let's not necessarily ask, I'll ask a couple of them initially, but I also want to ask, where are we, how much, because I don't think I've seen the latest deck. I'm not quite sure how long we've got to get through. How much more material do you have? About 15 minutes?
In the presentation?
Yes.
I think 10 minutes would be enough.
All right. Okay. In which case, let me ask these questions now. Yeah. So Thomas asked the question, which I think, firstly, kudos for actually managing to get a client to do a control test like this. It's very difficult.
Yes.
It's very difficult to do. Thomas says, now what are we actually measuring here? On the vertical axis that goes from 0 to 100%, are we measuring knowledge or behavioral change? What's being measured? Great question.
This is something that we call learning gain. It's among everything that's the participants didn't know at first, how much do they know at the end? So for example, if you ask a question and they reply correctly from the beginning, because they knew it already, this is not interesting to measure. If they answer incorrectly and then correctly, this is what you want to measure. So we're kind of measuring the increase in the abilities to answer correctly to all the questions that were presented to them.
So we are talking here about knowledge, yeah?
We're talking about knowledge, yes. So, of course, yeah, it's like questions that are that will encapsulate the knowledge contained in the training materials.
Okay, so that I mean, I know your thesis is that knowledge subsequently goes on to be part of behavioral change, and behavioral change may involve other factors as well as people knowing things. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm just saying that because I know the focus is on learning is always about behavioral change, and I think it's a great question which Thomas and also Gail asked. And Ben asked the same question in a different way, which is, okay, well, did the 80% managers, the managers on the blue line, go on to behave more effectively than the other managers? Do you have any measure of whether they were doing better at hitting their business goals?
Yeah, so it's always a problem to have this kind of data, of course,
Yep.
because it's very confidential and sensitive. But I mean, we don't need that data in a sense, because what we can guarantee is that those people who only learned, let's say, 20% at the end of the training, it's for sure that they are not applying the totality of the recommendations that were presented, because they don't even know about them. They've forgotten them in a sense, or they've never understood them. Whereas the people, the group that understand 80% of the training material at least has a chance to apply it in practice. So it doesn't mean that it's guaranteed, but it means at least they have a chance. And to me, it's a very small difference between knowing something and then transferring it into practice. Usually what's happening when you don't transfer it to practice is that you only fool yourself that you know it, and in fact, you've forgotten it. As I was discussing at the beginning.
So to summarize, what you're saying is, if looking at it the other way around, you can't change your behavior unless you know what it is you're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't even reach that level, then there's no chance of any behavioral change. At least the blue line has a chance of it. Now, that's
exactly.
It's a very low level, perhaps, of ambition. But David Glow puts it another way. L&D is responsible to show that employees have the skill to apply to the workplace. The workplace is primarily responsible to supporting it being applied. And I think there's something there, that this is talking about one side of helping people change the behavior. I would be delighted to see an experiment that took that and went on to the next stage. And look, we could go into quite a long, complex discussion about leadership, how complex it is and so on. I'm going to avoid that for the moment. We might come back to it. I want to go back to some questions we had earlier. Zhao asking, how many questions per day would a normal user get? So I mean, it may be impossible to answer, but could you give us a typical idea? Are people being bombarded with questions, or is it like one question a day?
No, so we recommend 5 minutes per day. So it will be maybe 10 to 20 questions, let's say, depending on the difficulty. So this is enough. 5 minutes per day is enough to have really significant results. So it's not a big time investment, but the results are really very, very sizable.
Okay, thank you. That's very clear. I mean, Tony does say, I think that's Tony B, is saying quite rightly, the problem with leadership is it's very difficult. It's very difficult to boil down with what it means. And companies faces, how do you measure the impact of leadership training, which is super difficult. It is a fair point.
So yeah, but I tend to disagree with this kind of arguments, and also
go on.
Actually, I should say that here is an example about leadership, but it works for any type of knowledge, really. So I've shown something about food safety. It could be about negotiation. It could be about theoretical physics, or it could really be about anything. So don't think that it's a tool about leadership training. This is just an example that we did with one of our...
That's a fair point. So we're not disagreeing with Tony B's thesis, which is that leadership training is extremely difficult to see the impact of. But what you're saying is, look, what we're talking about here is not exclusively linked to that. there are lots of other applications. And that comes on to a question we've got from Yao again. And I must apologize if I'm not pronouncing that properly. In which area is the model more effective? General skills behavior, on the other side, internal training procedures, product info. So in other words, would you say you tend to use this more with, for want of a better word, technical skills which can be easily defined, or perhaps some of the softer human skills which are more difficult to define?
Yeah, we've had cases with both types of skills, and it works really well with both, I would say. So it's not really limited.
So it's not, I was expecting you to say technical skills, but that's not the answer.
No, it's really not limited.
There are so many great questions coming in. I do love hanging out with smart people and having a proper talk about this stuff. And we're going to have to keep going forward, aren't we? Because we've already had about 10 minutes of Q&A. Let's keep going, but please keep these questions coming. We've got great people, great questions coming in. Thank you, Andrea, Olga, David. Right. Keep going. We're going to come back to these questions.
Yeah, fantastic questions. Thanks a lot. But I think we're almost done in terms of the presentation. So here I just wanted to mention a few testimonials from our customers. So at Swisscom, Director of Learning mentioned that this approach was at the frontier of innovation. At Michelin, the competency manager mentioned that there were very clear benefits, both at the company level, so for the management, and for the employees in terms of making learning more engaging and effective. And this is just some companies that we work with in all the sectors. So you see, it's really diverse. It doesn't restrict to an industry or to a type of skills or to anything, and it can really have an impact everywhere that learning is important. And indeed, those benefits that are often mentioned to us is that it increases the impact and therefore the ROI of the training programs. Because it's also clear how they impact the company's success. It makes the learning more enjoyable and more efficient because the learners are taken into account by the personalized approach. It can also save a lot of time in terms of generating a lot of micro-learning contents and digitalization. And also this visibility of learning across the company allows managers to make better decisions because they know where the skills are and how they're evolving, and they have this visibility thanks to the AI personalization. So now it's time to move to a very quick live demo. So I just wanted to show what our app looks like.
And when you said that earlier to me, Maxime, you said this is going to take 2 minutes, you said. So, people...
Yeah, 1 or 2 minutes even, yes.
Okay.
So this is just to show. So it's a multi-platform app, so you can use it on your computer in your browser, but you can also have a native app on your iPhone or Android. So you can use it whenever you have time. So it's really the concept of micro-learning that you can do on your mobile. So it's a very simple concept. Basically, your AI mentor will know what you should learn about every time you go on the app, and you just click on Let's Learn. And it will show you some questions that have been generated from your training program. So here we see something about motivation. Let's try true. Okay, it was true. Great. And you get some feedback. If you make a mistake, you will also get the correct solution will appear. And then you can also click on the link that will, well, in this case, it's a book, but you can also have a link to the precise page from the PDF or a PowerPoint document, for example, where this question was actually sourced. So you can see here, there's a lot of true, false questions, but it's really not limited in the format. So you can have multiple choice questions. It can be based on images. Like here we recognize this kind of figure that was in my presentation. So here it's the 98% of the 2 Sigma from Bloom. You can have, so here another, this is about spaced repetition and so on. And it's very interactive. You can flag the question, or you can write some comments. You can even edit the question and so on. Then here you have sort of feedback, so you can see a lot of metrics from how you've been performing and the evolution of your scores and knowledge and so on. There's also a leaderboard which allows to kind of gamify the learning. So some people are very competitive and they enjoy trying to reach the top of the leaderboard. And then there's a section about the courses. So in this demo version, it's just one course, but so you can imagine having like all your learning catalog here, and then the employees can decide to activate, deactivate, depending on what is most relevant for them. There are also a few admin tools. So if you're the manager, the training manager, you can have access to the question review, for example, where you can very quickly see what the AI has generated, and you can go through it and very quickly think, okay, I don't like this question. I will either edit it or maybe add a button or change the title or remove it. So this allows you to really appropriate those questions and correct anything that might be imperfect out of the AI. And finally, there's this dashboard. So you can select a duration, and then you can see, okay, so this is how people have been active. You can see how much time they spent on it. You can decide to focus on a specific employee, for example. And you can see all sorts of different metrics, like the learning gains that we were discussing before, and knowledge levels and so on. So here, it's a demo version of the app, so it's a little bit empty, but you can imagine all the interesting metrics that appear here. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much all for the live demo. I just wanted to show you how it looks like in real life, in a sense. And we can come back to the presentation for the Q&A.
Well, actually, what we'll come back to that at the end if you want, because I think people would rather see your face for the Q&A than just a slide with your email address. So I'm going to put your email address into the chat. So we've got that. Thank you, Maxime. Really, really interesting. Loads of great questions coming in, and some of them revolve around the use of ChatGPT. So let's go first to David saying, right, look, how does the AI tool divvy up? How does it decide which material goes to each participant? So if you've got Alan and Jane, how does it give Jane one thing and Alan something different?
So first, as I was showing in the course page, they will activate at least a topic. So maybe Jane wants some communication training, and Alan, or whichever name you said, wants some negotiation training or something. And so they would activate at least the theme. But then if within all the people who activated the same theme, the AI will first ask them maybe basic or random questions. And very quickly, based on how they answer, the AI will figure out their actual mastery level. And gradually, it takes after a few days of using it for 5 minutes, it's already understood very well what is your background knowledge and how your brain works, and therefore how to best help you benefit from your training, following the principles from the learning sciences.
So it's effectively, it's like a doctor asking a series of questions, but it's understanding from your responses how you should be, how material needs to be delivered and what material needs to be delivered to you. I'm interrupting you because I want to make sure we give everybody a chance to get their questions answered. Olga was saying, look, when measuring learning outcomes is always needed and valuable and it's difficult. Olga says, but look, really, actually, what we've got here is something that can be super valuable just in saving time and money for developing stuff that otherwise we'd develop traditionally and would take quite a long time. Very quickly, is that what your clients are finding, that they're using this? In my terms, I'd say it's an evolutionary approach. It's you doing the old thing in a new way. So they're doing the same thing, producing microlearning, but they're doing it much more effectively and faster. Is that one reason why people might use your tool?
Right. Yeah, it's one of the benefits that was highlighted, is that you can produce a lot of digital interactive microlearning very, very quickly and at scale. And this would take months or years even to get to the same level. Because as I say, you can have the same question, but ask in 10 different ways to adapt to the mastery level of each of the employees.
Zhao asks, and Andrea asks, and Zhao gives the thumbs up for it. Great question. How do you make people engage with an AI tutor? Now, there's a bit of research around this, and not necessarily with learning, but with confidential chatbots suggesting that people are sometimes very happy to engage with AI. In fact, they prefer it over people. In your experience, how do you make people, or how do you hope that people will engage with an AI device rather than a human being?
So again, here the answer is personalization in a sense, because there's nothing less more demotivating than interacting with the generic LMS, e-learning course, and you know that you have to click through it and it's completely inert. It doesn't pay any attention to what your needs are and what your motivations are. And the AI mentor is just the opposite. The more you use it, the more what you get from it is very suitable to where you are, and it will be just the right amount of challenge. And this will create some sort of addiction and satisfaction that increases the engagement.
So motivation is not a matter, it's often people assume that it's something to do with making something look good, and it's not. It's about that business of balancing the level of difficulty with also the sense that people are moving towards a goal. So it's giving them just the right amount of challenge. All right. Francois asks the first of a series of questions which revolve around GPT. What about confidentiality? If we're putting this into an AI system, does that then mean that the documents we're feeding, which might be special for our organization, are fed out into the general GPT database of documentation to be used by anybody?
Yeah, so if you use this yourself, if you use ChatGPT yourself, there is a chance that they will use your documents in a sense, but the type of partnership we have with OpenAI guarantees that none of the documents that we process will be saved for anything. So it's fully confidential, and we have the guarantee for that.
Brilliant. And I think that's a really important point. Thank you for raising it, Francois. David says, just an observation. I'm a fan of using this approach. Acting like a tailor, you start immediately taking measures and then you make adjustments. And David, I like that analogy, not just because my name is Taylor, but also because I think that too often we focus on trying to be perfect. And as I was told, I went to Normandy over the weekend, and I was told le mieux est l'ennemi de le bon. Le beau, whatever it is. I mean, the perfect is the enemy of the good. You've just sometimes got to get the job done. David says, also talking about GPT-4, does the tool ever get false positives? Does it create stuff like non-existent books?
Yes, of course. I mean, there's no AI tool that is 100% perfect. So it will always make mistakes, and sometimes the question is not correct. So this is why I've shown you that kind of platform where you can very quickly go through it and kind of validate the questions. But indeed, it's quite important to be aware that it's never 100% perfect. But when we do it internally, we have this entire process where we make sure that with the quality control that we don't let out something that is questionable. No pun intended.
And this is always the point of having the human in the loop, isn't it? Having the human being to check things, and we can't get rid of that. That, by the way, I'm doing a whole series of talks at the moment, which is all about that's our role. It makes a very different role for L&D. Do you create, Landon asks, do you create the content on which this is based? Or am I responsible for the content creation to populate the data? And I think you answered this, but let's just go over it again. I want to produce a course. Where does it come from?
So it's true. What I presented is that you already are in a situation where you do have a training program, and we just complement that to make it more powerful and impactful. So in this case, you have already the content, and you just send it to us, and we add the AI mentor to your program. But it's true that we can also work in a different way. You can just give us a theme, and from that theme, we can create a full learning experience and program for your employees. So we can also start from very little information and do a full learning experience.
And by the way, I just looked up. It was Voltaire who said it, as I thought, and it's a poem. It was a poem. He said, "Dans ses écrits en sage italienne dit que le mieux est l'ennemi du bien." I apologize for my pronunciation, but it's a great phrase. Is it possible to guess a fair proportion of multiple choice questions to some degree, or it is possible? So if people are guessing the answers, do they slant the results on what the AI does next? Does it take you in a new direction? Great question.
That's a great question. Absolutely. If it's a true false question, you have a 50% chance of answering, even if you don't know anything about the subject. So of course, this is taken into account by our in-house algorithms. that will, from the answers to the multiple choice questions, will be able to really build a model of the minds of all the learners. And of course, this is part of the difficulties to take into account this kind of nuances and so on. Yes.
Okay. Very, very quickly, David says, to be clear, the use of AI in this context is it augments an existing training course, but it's used post-training to extend and embed retention. I think it's a bit more than that, Maxime. If I'm correct in saying what you've said, you can put not training course, but just general documentation into the system. So it's not a training course, but it's a handbook, or it's just a PDF, and it produces a course from that. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. It can be a multiplicity of different sources that are important for the employees to be productive. And also, I should say, it's not necessarily post-training. It depends. If the training lasts for 3 months, let's say, you can start on day one of the training. You can even start 1 month before the training, so that when employees arrive at the training, which might be in person, they're already very familiar with all the key concepts. So it's really not, it is in the duration, in an extended period of time, that this will really have a big effect, but you don't need to wait for the training to be over to start with it, in a sense.
By the way, Gail, who is French, says such a sexy accent. I believe that French people say sexy accent for somebody who's speaking French with a very British accent. So I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, Gail, but thank you anyway. Zhao asks, can people learn any skill with the app, or only from the learning content provided by the company? There are many ways this could be interpreted, this question. Just to quickly ask you, Maxime, so are you providing...
I think we could have addressed it.
Go on.
Yeah, I mean, both cases are possible. So, and if you have training content in your company, then we will start with this, because this is what your employees are familiar with, and this is what is most useful for them. But we can also generate for any skills a training program that will be very effective.
I'm just saying a big thank you to everyone for coming in, because people are having to go away now. It is 1 minute to 4. Very quickly, David is saying, has it been used in language learning? Of course, there are lots of apps in the similar field, memorized,
yes,
Duolingo and so on. But
some of our customers wanted their employees to level up their German or English or something. And what we did is that we said, okay, we're going to take your documents and make sure that the kind of jargon that is used in your company will be reflected in the learning, in the language learning app. But because it's worthless for them to have a generic learning, a language learning app where they learn about hotels and holidays. It's not what they needed. So what we do is that we specialize this to the type of language that is used in each companies, and it has been very effective.
Just one last question, because we are having to wrap up, and I just want to ask this last question as everyone rolls past. Sorry, it's moved up and off the screen. It is. I tell you what, rather than asking any more questions, because it's 4 o'clock now, I'm going to 4 o'clock in the UK, 5 in Europe. And thank you, people joining us from the States as well, for coming along, because it's early in the morning for you. Just want to quickly ask Maxime, as we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to share with people about how you think personalization and the role of AI is going to change what we do in learning development as we go forward as a profession?
Yeah, I mean, I think the impact will be absolutely huge, because it's something that we've known for some time that we should be doing, but that we've kind of erased from our consciousness, in a sense, because it's hard to do, and we don't have a trainer for each of the employees to spend 24 hours with them and personalize everything. So I think we've kind of put that to the side, but not because we don't believe in it, because it was hard to implement, and now that it's possible to implement it, I think the motivation and the enthusiasm will really explode around that.
Some great comments here, except for Dave Brown. I'm an Arsenal fan. He's saying that I shouldn't be speaking French after our appalling display against Lens. But it's been great hanging out with everybody and getting great questions and interactions. Maxime has done a great job of dealing with everything, great presentation, but also dealing with everything that's coming on the fly. So I want to say a big thank you to everybody in the room. Maxime, a big thank you to you. Final word for you, and then we'll wrap up. And what do you want to say to close?
Yeah, thank you very much, Donald, for the hosting this webinar, and I'm very happy also to follow up with any of you that want to have more questions and want to discuss how we can collaborate.
Brilliant.
Thanks a lot for attending, and see you soon.
Merci à tous. Au revoir. Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.